and welcome back to another episode of Wealth, Purpose, Peace. I'm Jonathan Hall,
I'm Brian Grant.
and we are financial advisors with Warburton Capital. Our goal with this podcast is to walk through questions that we get asked as financial advisors all the time. And today, Brian, I think we do have an interesting one. We got asked this one last night in the last meeting of the day.
Yeah,
I think it's one of the more common questions that we get,
for sure.
and it circles around Social Security. The question being, when should I file for Social Security? Or maybe even asked a different way, should I file for Social Security early? I think there are a lot of motivations behind that question, a lot of kind of questions behind the question that we'll get to here later on in the episode. But I'm curious to just see where you fall with that question.
Yeah, I mean, like all of these that we've covered, it's going to depend on your individual circumstances, right? So there's not going to be a one size fits all answer for this one. But the goal is just to help people at least have a framework of some of the things to think through as they process that question. And it's interesting just how often we get it because it's normally not the decision that's going to most make or break someone's retirement success, but nonetheless, it seems like it's one that people think about the most, and I
Mm-hmm.
and I wonder if it's because they, like, were forced into this system and they had no control over it, and now this is, like, the one thing they can control is when, and so I kinda get it. So the real thing is for most people at this point, this might not apply to some older folks, but for most people thinking about their full retirement age, it's gonna be age 67, and that's when your benefit is at 100% based on your earnings record. That's kinda what everything is anchored off of. Any reductions or any increases are sort of anchored off that full retirement age benefit, and, maybe we'll cut to the very end at the start, which is for most people, tends to make sense to wait until that full retirement age. But again, let's think through some of the trade-offs, the biggest being personal longevity, right? I mean, that's kinda our starting point for people is, you know, if you knew when you were gonna die, we could give you an exact answer as to when you should file, and you don't know that. So you should know going into it, there is not going to be a perfect choice that you know will be perfect for you 20, 30 years from now. It's impossible to know for sure.
Yeah. If we zoom out for a second, Brian,
Mhm.
ultimately what we're looking at is essentially an annuity guaranteed by the United States government that we've all been paying into our entire working careers, right? And so maybe part of why people kind of latch onto it and want to analyze it and ask questions about it is because there is the word guaranteed involved with it,
Mhm.
right? And we get one chance to make one election on the front end of retirement about how we want to take that benefit. And then we receive that benefit guaranteed for the rest of our lives. As you just highlighted, though, the biggest X factor is how long are we going to live? And so if someone's staring at Social Security and trying to decide, when should I take it? A lot of times I think, because technically you could take it 62,
Mhm.
63, 63 and 6 months, you could take it at a variety of points.
Right.
I think people often think, okay, should I take it at 62? Should I take it at 67? Or should I take it at 70? Those are kind of the typical exits off of the highway that
Yeah.
we talk to clients about. Like you said, if we knew when someone was going to pass away, it'd be very clear.
Mhm.
But why don't we walk through, Brian, what's the kind of the con of taking it at 62 and the pro of taking it at 70?
Sure. Yeah, so again, anchoring off of your full retirement age of 67, let's say that's 100% your benefit. Starting at age 62 is gonna work out to a 30% reduction roughly of your benefits from what it would have been at age 67, and that's permanent. That's an important.
That doesn't go away
Right, it
at
doesn't.
67.
Exactly, because there are some other temporary reductions based on earnings you might have, and we can get into that maybe, but this is a permanent reduction for filing early, and so there may be good reason to do that, but it's permanent, and then there's a whole complicated formula, like most things with the government, to figure out what the reduction would equate to sometime between 62 and 67, but that's the most punitive, is that 30% roughly reduction. The flip side is, what if we delayed past 67 and you get roughly an 8% increase from your age 67 benefit for each year you wait up to age 70? There's no benefit to waiting past 70. You should just go ahead and start. But that's the mathematical pros and cons. Um, so, I mean, it's certainly important for most people. If you do the math, the curves cross somewhere early to mid 80s, right? Of taking it at 62 and getting fewer dollars but for longer versus waiting and getting more dollars but for less time, right? The curves tend to cross early to mid 80s. So you might think, I, you know, I don't know. In general, actuarial tables for me say I'm going to live past that. Seems like medical advancements and all these things are making people live longer. And most people do live longer. But this is where you need to kind of think through, maybe there are non-financial components that go into making this financial decision, which is like, right, but I know I have this diagnosis, or I have a history of XYZ, or my family has this longevity track record, good or bad, and sway that decision based on that.
Well, and that's a point I wanted to make, Brian,
Mhm.
is that if you, um, because we talked about a con of taking Social Security early, which is the reduced benefit. But if you don't take it and then you are waiting to take it till 67 and you pass away at 63, the government's not going to come with a big check and say, here's all the lifetime benefits that you paid into the system, even. If you're married, there will be a spousal benefit, but that spousal benefit is instead of both of the benefits that you would have been receiving. So it's not the same number of dollars coming into the household. So a pro of taking it early, and really just about the main reason I think it would make sense to take it early, is if you have some sort of health issue that could impact you going and having a life that goes out to the actuarial table, right? If you knew that you were going to pass away, then taking it early, like if you got a diagnosis or something like that, taking it early can make a ton of sense. Now, if you, in a previous episode, Brian, we talked about retiring early and what that could look like. That's a time when we get asked this question probably the most is, hey, I'm thinking about retiring or having a career shift in my mid to late 50s. Should I take Social Security early to help supplement that? Because as we've discussed in the past, the basic retirement calculation is we have money that's going out, we have money that's coming in, and the rest needs to come from the portfolio. So, okay, if all the money is coming out, well, it doesn't make sense to turn it on earlier. But what if someone wants to continue to keep working though for a little bit?
Right. Well, I mean, and that's one of the points, and then we'll circle back to longevity as it relates to the spouse. But because we get this a lot, it's like, well, yeah, but I'll start it at 62 and then I'll just invest it. So even though there's the reduction, I'm investing it. And it's like, and I hear you, all else equal, that's probably better than spending it in terms of maybe making up some of that, let's say 30% reduction you got from starting early. The problem though is, foundational to that decision is the assumption that you don't need that income then, right? You don't need it to spend because you can invest it. So you therefore still have other earnings, most likely. If you have other earnings, now we don't just have the permanent reduction for early filing, there's an earnings test. And don't quote me on this, maybe quote me on this. The calculation there, from starting early is, there's a threshold, it's low, it's like $25,000 worth of earnings. And for every dollar you earn over the for every $2 you earn over that, your benefits are gonna be reduced by a dollar. So the point is, you're gonna be further your benefits will be further reduced by the fact that you also have earnings. So now you have another hurdle to overcome. And I mean, I'm all for investing in the market, but you get to this point where that hurdle rate of what you'd have to earn to make up for all of these reductions in benefits just might not make sense. And
Mhm.
back to the point you made earlier, one is a guarantee, the other is a hypothetical. Like, we have a track record of what's happened in the stock market. There's no guarantee of what's gonna happen next year or over the next 5 or 30. I don't know. Um, the benefit, assuming the government stays intact, but this is a promise to pay. This is we have to make the decision based on what we know today. And so it's just another hurdle where it gets difficult, but
I
but
want to
go ahead.
use I want to use a real life example,
Mhm.
a real life story. So a couple days ago, I got to play in a charity golf tournament for an awesome cause, and it was a scramble, and we got to go out and play off of the best players or the best shot from each player, and um, ahead of time, the great thing about it being a charity scramble is you got to buy mulligans. and they
That's my
took
kinda tournament.
and they took credit cards, right? So it was the type of thing where ahead of time you could say, well, I'm sure at some point during this golf tournament, and believe me, I had a couple in my pocket, right? At some point during this golf tournament, I'm going to let the team down, and I'm probably going to want to use this mulligan to try to hit it closer to the hole, right?
Mhm.
With this Social Security decision, especially filing early, we don't get a mulligan. There's no opportunity to redo this or undo it.
Sure.
And if one of the motivating questions behind the question of should I take it early, I think one of the big questions there is someone's really wanting to not make a mistake with this big thing that they've been paying into their whole lives. You don't get many milestones in life once you pass about 21 or 25, I think is when you can rent a car, right? 21 is when you can drink, 18 is when you can vote, right? And once we pass that age, there aren't many milestones until we start getting to Medicare and Social Security. So it gives us something to think about going into it.
Mhm.
And if we if the motivating factor is I really don't want to make a mistake, in my mind, if we're trying to paint with a really broad stroke, in general, one of the easiest ways to make a mistake is to elect to take it early and then start working a lot and then have a health thing um, never show up, right? Which would be great.
Right.
But
Be good for your
you
life.
live to 110,
Right.
right? And then, you're probably fine. You live to 110. Well done. But in terms of did I make the right Social Security decision?
Mhm.
I think you open yourself up to a lot more potential for problems taking it early.
Mhm. No, I agree. Okay, so taking it early, again, I mean, from a high level, unless you really have some longevity questions in your mind for you personally, or you need the money to spend genuinely, probably makes sense to wait. So maybe let's talk about when might it make sense to delay. I mean, at least till full retirement, but maybe even past that. There's a couple reasons. I mean, one is just you want a higher guaranteed portion of your retirement benefits, and you have enough liquid assets to cover those extra years of delay, and you can get there, and the plan works.
Mhm.
And somebody can help you think through that who is used to incorporating Social Security benefits as part of a broader plan, as part of what we do. Um, the other big thing, and this is why I talked about longevity in another aspect, is as it relates to if you're married and let's say, particularly if there's an age gap. So let's say I'm older than my wife by a few years, and women tend to live longer than men, and I have the higher benefit estimate from working. Well, you mentioned this earlier, but something happens to me for all the years beyond that my wife's still alive, she's gonna be entitled to the higher of the 2 benefits. And if I delay until 70, she's gonna get that higher age 70 benefit. And so that can be really helpful, not just financially, but from a peace of mind aspect, almost
Mhm.
like an insurance component, let's think of it as.
Mhm.
And so I think that's where delaying until 70 can make a lot of sense. It's also a guaranteed 8% increase. It's not terrible, right? I mean, you you can do better than that in the market. You can do worse.
Mhm.
So it's not awful in and of itself. Again, presuming the other pieces of your financial plan are there to make that delay work. But the survivor benefit is the thing I think people often overlook. As long as they wait till their full retirement age, to go ahead and claim, they're going to get your higher survivor benefit amount. And if you file early, particularly, that's even more punitive. But if you wait until 70, that's even more helpful. So
Well,
that's an area that gets overlooked.
and another thing I would point out about potentially waiting is that, yes, I think the age gap is a big one. Um, Also, if you are continuing to work and you just haven't retired yet, that's an area where we've seen it make a lot of sense for someone to continue um, not taking their benefit,
Mhm,
waiting from 67 to 70,
mhm,
is maybe they're still working at their job or owning their business and they have a ton of income coming in, and that social security, a lot more of it's going to go to tax than it might have if they were to wait. Here's the crazy thing, because now we've opened Pandora's box. Once we start talking about tax rates and tax brackets and Social Security, we start really diving down a rabbit hole of planning. And this is where working with a professional, a financial advisor, can really be helpful because there are a host of other reasons why you might want to wait. There are some clients we're working with where they have what we call an income valley from when they retire to when they want to start Social Security.
mhm.
They have plenty of assets to make it through retirement without Social Security. But of course, they're going to file. They've been paying into the system like the rest of us,
Sure.
but it might make sense in their case to delay just so that we have more years where they have little to no income, depending on the mix of their assets between IRA, Roth, taxable. This is where it starts getting a lot more complex, obviously beyond the scope of a podcast,
Yeah.
but where Social Security can fit into a broader financial plan for even someone who's high net worth or ultra high net worth. We can make some smart choices to help move the football forward. Or, last thing I'll say about filing at 70 is if if you're on the other end of the spectrum, so we're not high net worth, ultra high net worth, but Social Security represents a big part of our total retirement picture, and we haven't been able to accumulate as quite as many liquid assets throughout our lifetimes, it might make sense to wait until 70 as well, because that bigger amount guaranteed for life might be just the thing that takes us through. So
Yeah.
I don't want to overemphasize it, but I think it is important to work with someone who knows your unique situation, because just in these couple of minutes, what I've outlined a few different scenarios, very different from one another, that might lead us to the exact same conclusion.
Right. Well, and for that person, more of their retirement, let's say income is inflation protected, and that could be even more helpful too. So, yeah, it's funny. Again, if 67 is the start date, let's just assume we hear a ton of people ask about starting it early and not as many ask about delaying. And I think if anything, it often makes more sense to delay than it does to start early if you're going to change. So, but yeah, but I think it's a helpful framework to think through. To your point, the best advice for you is advice that's tailored to you. And so you need to have these conversations if you want to make an informed choice. I wouldn't make a fear-based choice. That's maybe the last thing I'd want to leave people with is try not to make this urgent fear-based choice of, well, I just think I'm going to die young. And that's not really based on anything. You just have this feeling. The bigger one is, well, I think the program's going to go bust and go out.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, because that comes up all the time.
I think that's the primary motivator for, obviously not everybody, but a lot of the times that we get asked that question
Mhm.
is because they're afraid that the whole system's going to go away. And I'm not saying that those fears are invalid.
Mhm.
We see headlines about the Social Security system all the time. I'm less confident that you and I are going to collect Social Security benefits one day, but I'm fairly confident that people that are close to retirement or at retirement, where they could be thinking about this 62 versus 70 question, they're probably okay. Because we can, and I think maybe that's the question behind the question is, am I going to make a mistake with this really big decision?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
the
Is
mis-
future me going to regret today's choice?
The mistake being, "Oh, I didn't take it. I missed my chance, and now the whole system's gone."
Right.
If we look at historically what types of reforms have come into play with social programs, a lot of times the reforms have had to do with either changing the retirement age, right? I think that's possible, but when they do that, it's usually for younger folks.
Mhm.
It might be for you and me.
Right.
Our retirement age.
70 is full retirement age.
Right,
Right.
exactly, and that's the way to stretch the assets out longer
Sure.
in the trust, in
Yeah.
the Social Security trust, or raising the wage base, or the wage limit for
Mhm.
Social Security taxation,
Yeah.
or, making it, based on your income more, or there are a lot of reforms being batted around.
Sure.
Almost all of those reforms, unless we get in really dire straits, are gonna apply to folks like us in our
Right.
30s,
Right.
not people approaching retirement.
But I was thinking about this. Take the most punitive thing I've seen talked about, which is okay, there's not enough money in the trust. Eventually, that's going to run out 7, 10 years. You hear different numbers. And today, we only collect 80% roughly, is the number I've seen thrown around of what we would need to be able to pay out in benefits. So then think that through. You're 62, you're deciding, should I take it early compared to 67? Because I'm worried the program's gonna go bust. Well, if I take it at 62, like we just said, it's a 30% reduction. That's permanent. So I'm gonna take on a guaranteed 30% reduction permanently to avoid a hypothetical 20% reduction. I just I get the fear. Again, like, I'm paying into this thing and no one asked me if I wanted to, and it might not be there. That's not fun, but I still doesn't mean that that decision makes sense. And plus, e there's a million things that could change in a million ways, not just Social Security, and then
Right.
all your financial planning stuff can need to change, right? So it's hard to make financial decisions today based on how changes might be made in the future to tax brackets, Social Security, retirement account withdrawals. I mean, there's tons of rules. So you kinda have to operate within the framework you know today. So, but I mean, I think that's a good point is avoid fear-based decisions, work with someone who can help you actually figure out a good tailored plan to your circumstance. But hopefully this is helpful for people to just broad strokes think through, I've got my anchor point of full retirement age. When does it make sense to start early or to wait? So,
Absolutely.
yep.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Wealth, Purpose, Peace. We'll see you again soon.